Husker fever is rising. I have. All right, let's get going so we don't extend your Fridays too long into the day. And let me back up a little bit and just start with what we've been saying for a long time now, and you've heard it before, but everything falls into this context. And that context is that everybody knows Lincoln is on the move. Over the last 8 years, we've built community confidence and created the momentum that that has Lincoln on the right track. We continue to receive national accolades for our strong business climate, for our thriving economy, for our high quality of life, and for being one of the 10 best managed cities in the country. Every budget this administration recommends is offered with the goal of building on those great successes. Our community has enjoyed an extraordinary number of successes. The mid-biennium budget adjustments are no exception. All is to the end of keeping Lincoln growing and prosperous and everyone employed. We have committed to progress, but that progress in this instance can only be sustained by reinvesting the benefits of growth into future growth. Reinvesting the property tax reevaluation revenues is an example of reinvesting the growth dividend. Our most important goal for the budget in this interim was to avoid future deficits, to make our budget, in other words, structurally sound. We have made tremendous progress over the last few years in fixing the budget by insisting that both expenditure increases and revenue reduction be paid for every year as it happens. It's the right way to run government. This wasn't happening when I took office in 2007. The budget was a mess. Annual deficits of $5 million or more were common, and our economy was at a standstill. We engaged the community, we set priorities, and we made the hard choices that both cut city government and added revenues. We stopped those practices that grew our deficits and prevented progress. The annual budget deficit hurt our ability to build our economy and to attract families and young professionals to live in our community. Our commitment to sound budgeting principles is taking this community in the right direction. My budget adjustment proposal maintained this standard and kept us from returning to the destructive ways of the past. Another goal of our original budget resolution was to address a critical public safety need. Lincoln's fire engines and ladder trucks have not been routinely replaced since 1995. As a result, an aging fleet threatens our emergency response capability. Of our 18 frontline apparatus, 8 are more than 15 years old. Old fire engines require high levels of maintenance, take fire crews out of action, costing taxpayers, and creating longer response times when help is needed. We need to reallocate resources to this purpose as soon as possible. I wanted this budget to make some headway on the police fire pension because it's an obligation we have made to the people who protect our safety. When the stock market crashed in 2008, the pension lost tens of millions of dollars that the taxpayers must, by law, make up. We need to make steady progress on adequately funding that pension. That's why I recommended shifting an additional $900,000 to the Police Fire Pension Fund. Finally, I wanted a budget that continued to support the community's growth. Parks, libraries, and services for our seniors have been hit hard in the past by cuts during the tough budgets, during the national recession. Let me give you an example. The Parks and Recreation Department has 42 fewer employees today than they did in 2007, while their responsibilities have grown overall significantly. I did not want this budget to force future cuts in those areas because of actions that we took today. I believe that a property levy reduction at this time would conflict with all of these community goals. Supporters of a property tax levy reduction saw the issue differently and offered a budget amendment to reduce the tax rate. That plan, as proposed, does not accomplish what they set out to accomplish. The city is required by state law to submit a budget where the revenues and expenditures are balanced. The levy cut proposal, known as Resolution A, does not properly meet the legal requirements. In addition, the proposal was offered prematurely. It is better process to introduce a levy reduction at the start of the next biennium, of the next 2-year period. So the idea is exposed to rigorous, in-depth discussion. When the 2-year budget preparation is in full swing next year, our citizen groups will have a greater opportunity to review the proposal, compare it to the budget as a whole, and offer guidance. We will listen to them, and we will make changes accordingly. The budget resolution is now contained in 3 different resolutions. I have already signed resolutions B and C into law in previous days. Resolution B meets basic city fiscal and legal requirements. It is fundamental. Resolution C has funding that is essential to the police department. These funds would go to completion of a new firing range, replacing of a 911 phone system and collaborations that we use in collaborations with 12 cities and counties. The nearly $1 million needed to pay police officers, and most importantly, the funding for the 4 new police officers we added in last year's budget. It was imperative that this money be preserved since these funds were set to lapse at midnight, just hours after the city council meeting. So now I find myself in a startling situation regarding Resolution A. Originally, we believed that a veto of Resolution A was the best course of action to meet our community's budget goals. Resolution A contained the language to cut the tax levy. By vetoing Resolution A, also, among other things, not by vetoing, but if I vetoed Resolution A, among other things, it meant that we could not purchase the fire engines or put the $900,000 into the police fire pension. I felt that those were important goals that should not wait. As I mentioned before, Resolution A intended to reduce the levy by 1 cent. After studying the amendment, the Budget Office has concluded that it does not cut the funds needed in the 15-16 budget to support the reduction. Therefore, the levy cannot legally be lowered and maintain a balanced budget. as required by city charter. Since Resolution A allows the city to purchase the fire apparatus and move the $900,000 into the pension without lowering the levy, it actually makes more sense to sign it than to veto it. Further, with the amendment offered by Councilwoman Leary and Gaylord Baird, more resources will be shifted to parks, the pension, and to fixing potholes. In this unanticipated situation, signing Resolution A actually accomplishes more of the goals that keep Lincoln a strong and vibrant community. Despite these differences on the levy question, we altogether accomplished many of the goals we had in common. Most of the council indicated their support for the new fire trucks and more dollars to the pension. It was the reason we included these items in our original budget proposal. Today's announcement that I have signed Resolution A will be a surprise to many. They will be surprised to learn that Resolution A best fits our goal for maintaining a fiscally responsible budget that improves safety and supports Lincoln's growth. It is not the choice that I expected to make, but it is the choice that is best for Lincoln. So with that, I'll take your questions and
do you mind explaining the levy issue more into detail? I mean, how come it's not legally, how come we can't legally put his idea into law or whatever?
well, it's a combination of things, but let me have the budget office, let me have Steve Hupka, our budget officer, take you through the mechanics of it, and then we can talk about the philosophy of it a little bit.
Yeah, the proposal, first of all, made some reductions in money for 14-15, but didn't transfer those reductions to the 15-16 fiscal year. It didn't rebalance the fiscal 15-16 budget by adjusting the revenue sources properly. Some of the cuts were in non-tax funds, which have no impact on the tax rate. One of the cuts, $350,000, was a future borrowing that could only be used for one purpose, also didn't have anything to do with the tax rate. And then one of the big reductions that was proposed was from an amount that was an up to amount that doesn't have the large enough number in it at fiscal year end to be implemented. And we did inform council that that estimate that was in our original amendment was high. It would be lower. It's substantially lower, as it usually is by the end of the fiscal year, and the cut that was being proposed to be made just wasn't available. And once again, even if it had been available, you still have to balance the 15-16 budget and make a transfer from the 14-15 cuts. So there's several technical reasons that it didn't work.
And do you feel that Councilman Christensen received enough advice from everyone when he was pursuing this, that he could come up with the correct?
I think he received the advice that he sought, and my contact with him was in my office for about 5 minutes, and I told him I thought there were some problems using 14-15 money. He didn't follow up on that. He asked me to recalculate the levy amount, which I did for him. And that was about the extent of the contact outside of public meetings, which we're all on live TV and in the public record right from the start.
You know, let me just make a couple of comments, if I might. Everything we do in the city government, and the way we've tried to be sure that all are benefited by the knowledge of the bureaucracy, is that we ask people to talk to our city attorney, to talk to our budget officers, to talk to our public works directors, to talk to the people who deal with the matters that they're interested in, and that those people give them help. And our instructions have uniformly been that if they're asked questions and asked for help, we respond. We do that for a variety of reasons. We do it in part because the council doesn't have staff help itself. And we want to accommodate them. This is a characteristic process that happens week in and week out for the last 8 years. And it happens on simple matters, and it happens on more complex matters. But this matter, this effort to reduce the property tax levy and to deal with year-end balances and to deal with reappropriations and to deal with all kinds of terms that you had a very hard time understanding today when we were talking about it, that I have a very hard time understanding sometimes because they're complex. This is not a little small business. This is 2,000 employees, $170 or $80 million general fund budget, plus a whole number of other funds, all of which have sets of rules and procedures that pertain to how you transfer them from one fund to another, how you transfer them from year to year. And some of these processes are very fundamental to the well-being of city management. And we pay a lot of attention to how these things are treated, because we are one of the 10 best managed cities in the country, and we want to stay there. So when somebody comes in to draft an amendment of this complexity, they have to know what they're doing. They have to do their homework. They have to get advice from the people if you get advice from people on the small matters, why wouldn't you get advice from them on the most complex matters? And the fact is that these details that resulted in the failure of the effort should have been explored and asked about and received answers from the people who knew about these matters. And that was not done. So, and you'll have to ask why that was not done. But it shouldn't have been such a big matter to begin with, because this biennium process was not designed to change the world. It was designed to make emergency changes. It was designed to make relatively minor adjustments. And all of a sudden, without notice to other members of the council, this huge tax levy decrease, complicated tax levy decrease, was proposed at a point in time in the 2-year process where, in my opinion, it should not have been proposed. The proper time is at the end of the biennium when you address the next 2 years' budget. That's the time that you address the levy for each of those 2 years. And the reason you do that, principally, is because when you're examining those budgets for the 2-year process, you look at everything. Every little part of the budget is taken apart, and we spend many, many days talking to the public, having, as you know, surveys, having group meetings, calling together groups of people to talk about things they're interested in, and we get a lot of public input. When you try to cut a levy and cut a budget without identifying what you're cutting in the budget, that's what we're doing here. We're dropping the revenues so the budget has to be cut in the future before there's any discussion of what what part of the budget you're going to cut. So it evades real public discussion. And it's wrong to do it at this point in time. But it was done. And whoever the drafter of it was, and I don't know who that was, obviously were not well acquainted with what they were attempting to do.
So a year down the road then, because even though this didn't meet its legal obligations, you did have the majority of council members in favor of it. A number of people at the public hearing spoke in favor of it. Is this something that you'd seriously revisit in a year as far as property tax relief goes?
Oh, we will seriously revisit it every budget cycle. That's a kind of a fundamental part of the budget cycle. You know, you go out and you ask people what they expect city government to do. You put a price on that which you perceive they want you to do, and you build that price into a budget, and you tell people what it'll cost to do what they want to do, and then you make decisions about whether they want to really do that much or they will accept less in order to pay less. It's a back and forth process in many ways. And again, the problem with doing it here is that there is no back and forth. The budgets aren't opened up again for discussion of the relative merits of cutting over here in libraries or cutting over here in pools or recreation or public works and roads. Do we put less in roads? How do we cut this $1.8 million that apparently Councilman Christensen wanted to cut? Where do we take that money from in those future years? That decision was never intended to be made, and that's what's wrong with the process in part.
Also, I might correct you, the majority of people at the public hearing did not speak in favor of a tax levy decrease.
Correct, but the council members did vote majority in favor. I just said a handful of people at the hearing did speak in favor of it. Thank you.
And
Yeah.
your message.
And
I'm sorry.
And it might be worth mentioning that bottom line, signing A, B, and C, as I have, we didn't change anything. Am I being accurate in that? We essentially didn't change anything from what the Republican council suggested. They just didn't get it right.
Mayor, your message to people, I mean, many Lincolnites are going to be paying more in property taxes because of the revaluation, obviously. What would your message be to them? Is this as tight as it can be? I mean, it's just not possible that they can not have their taxes go up, or how would you respond to that?
Well, their tax rate is not going
The
up.
rate isn't, but their taxes will because of the revaluation. Many
Yeah.
people who have had their properties revalued are gonna have to pay more in property taxes because of the revaluation, even if the levy stays the same. Well,
Well,
what would the message
do you
be to
know,
them?
do you know how this community got in big trouble and you were here. You can bear witness to this. We were trying to grow, and there was a big discussion in the community about whether we'd just kind of stay the same or whether we would really try to grow. And we made a decision, but we didn't really fully commit to the decision in the sense that the decision was to grow and to do more and compete in the international world, in the national world. And so when we did grow and homes started to be built on the edge of town and whole additions were built and we had to extend double-lane arterial streets out to these new additions, sometimes at the price of $10 million a mile, there was a cost to that growth, a very real cost. The benefit of the growth was the increase in the property taxes and the increase in property tax values. So the cohesive theory that works is if you grow, then you need to take the benefits of growth, the increased revenues from growth, and reinvest in the community so that you can pay for the growth. When I came into office in 2007, there were at least a half a dozen huge agreements with developers out there where the city had promised to pay for growth in the form of roads and water and sewer infrastructure. and we weren't able to do it. And we essentially wrote notes to developers that we would pay you X number of years in the future. We were getting behind. The budget was a mess. And it was a mess in part because we adopted growth, but we didn't reinvest the growth dividend into that, into paying for that growth.
Is there any downside to signing
From my perspective, there is no downside to signing
A? Financially, is there any downside? The stuff taken out of 14-15, does it affect anything?
No, especially as compared to the alternative, which is not signing it, there is no downside that I can see.
Can I just clarify in Resolution C, is that referring to the roughly $640,000 reallocated money? Is that amount of money that you're referring to?
Resolution C is reappropriations, right?
I believe that's one with the.
Yes, the reappropriated monies and the money we're moving for the police contract.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that is very important, that we did get reappropriated the money to pay the police contract whenever that gets settled. Because otherwise, we'd settle a contract for the last fiscal year, but would have let the money lapse to pay that. So, very important that that got reappropriated, which it did.
How much did that total?
Well, I think in the document, I think it was $856,000.
For the police contract with the
For
entire
the
amount.
police,
around
not
10
the,
million.
not the
Around 10
entire
million.
reappropriation.
Yeah, there's a significant amount of other items in there as well.
When we spoke with, I believe it was you, we spoke with Monday, there was a very specific, like you said, maybe $637,000. That was a pretty big item of discussion. And I'm just trying to figure out
Okay.
which resolution that falls
It's an A.
under.
It's an A. That's an A, and that was
That's fine.
designated for fire trucks. And that was the amount that we received in property taxes due to the valuation being higher than what we projected a year ago when we made a projection for that year.
So that will continue to be spent on the fire trucks.
Was there any attempt to come to any reconciliation? I know that you met with some of the Republican council people yesterday.
We did, we sat down with a couple of them and asked them what their ideas might be with respect to further compromise on the matter. And today they came back and indicated that they didn't have any suggestions. Is that fair enough? Because I'm talking indirectly here.
True, but we did offer a couple of suggestions of our own.
Yeah. All right, you good to go? Thank you.
I'd like to add, in terms of property